Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Redwood Library in Athenæum. My name is Benedict Lecca, Executive Director. I'm speaking from home. Kids and the dinner, we're calling. We're very, very pleased indeed to have such a distinguished speaker tonight. And as you know, the topic couldn't be more timely. And of course, many of you know Brigadier General Peter Zwack. He has spoken at the Redwood before, and tonight he is going to discuss his new memoir, Swimming the Volga, about his time spent in Russia in the 1990s. And that book is available widely. It just came out on Amazon and Kindle. You can get it all over the place, so I invite you to get it. General Zwack served as the United States senior defense official and attaché to the Russian Federation during the challenging years of 2012 to 2014. He retired in 2015 after 34 years of military service. He served for 4 years as the Russia-Eurasia Fellow in the Institute for National Strategic Studies within the National Defense University. While there, he taught a master's course in national security studies. General Zwack is currently a global fellow at the Kennan Institute within the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars. And he also serves as an adjunct fellow at the Bell Center for International Relations. Now, he, of course, has a long previous career. He began his work in Russian Eurasian affairs as a U.S. Army Soviet Foreign Area Officer at the Defense Language Institute in 1988, then the Russian Institute in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, West Germany in 1989 to 91. And he has served and written extensively in this field since then. And of course, he's gone there many times, and I think it's safe to say that he is certainly one of the top experts in Russian politics and society in the West. I was just thinking maybe we should just ship him over there right now and try to talk Putin off the ledge. That would be Redwood money well spent. But in any case, I look forward to a robust question and answer with this great expert on a topic that is really, really weighing on all of us, I'm sure. So without further ado, please help me welcome General Zwack to this evening's lecture. Thank you all so much. I can't hear.
It's not allowing me to unmute him.
I don't know what to do. He needs to unmute somehow.
Benedict, sorry.
Oh, here we are.
Oh, we got it?
Tech support.
Yes.
I would be zero without my bride. I don't know what happens, but sometimes I think Macs are over-engineered. Benedict, thank you so much. Let's take a deep breath. Thank you so much for the introduction. Members of the Redwood Library and friends, this is an enormous honor for me. Sadly, yeah, I'll say sadly, we speak about this topic, which is in the news and dangerously so. And I will keep referring to that, but I don't want to completely to take away this narrative of my experiences and perspectives of Russia the last 32 years. But certainly this is overshadowing all of it. It's called Swimming the Volga because the Volga River plays a major role in my early days in the Soviet Union. So the book I wrote is that, but it covers the period really of the breakup of the Soviet Union. And then I come in later with a forward and an afterward that brings it to the future. Julie, slide, please. Many of you were full adults during, I think a lot of us just sort of breathed a collective sigh of relief and euphoria with the drawing of the Soviet flag on the day after Christmas, 1991, and the white, blue, and red traditional Russian flag. At that time, I'd just come out of the Russian Institute, and where I was for 2 years with a bunch of young army captains watching Soviet Union go through these plate tectonic changes, glasnost, perestroika, the opening of the Berlin Wall, the collapse, the reunification. So this was an amazing time. And I think many of us who've been around, and you have, would say it is almost a miracle that we all survived the Cold War. Little picture on the right there is myself with some Army peers. We're on an orientation trip in 1990, and we're in the, at that time, Soviet city of Minsk, now the capital of Belarus. And we get pulled into a May Day parade, because Americans at that time are rock stars. And so there we are in a May Day parade. Of course, our seniors were not so happy that we did that, but it is what it is. But the bottom line here, and I'll come back to that theme several times, we didn't, most of the policy and analytical wonks, and even the Soviets and Russians themselves thought that the Soviet Union was going to break up the way they did. Slide. This is the most important slide in the briefing, insofar as, you talk about the origin story. And we can talk way back to the end of the Second World War, but again, this period, this moment in time after Christmas 1991, and mostly peacefully, this colossal Soviet Union breaks up into 15 different nations. The Russia being the dominant one, but Ukraine breaks away, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Azerbaijan, all these countries you're hearing today where there are major issues. And this, I will only say, not even if you're a Russian nationalist, but you are a mainstream Russian Democrat, you wanted change and you wanted to provide liberties and all that, but you did not expect your country to break up. And there is a lot of baggage with this, which I'm going to show in some subsequent pictures. And then the other point being, all right, you have all those Soviets, now Russians, that wake up and their country's broken up. Now imagine you're one of 25 million to 30 million Russian ethnic Russians now that wake up the same day in another country, half of which hate your guts. And so that gets all that irredentist stuff going. So this is the key slide. And if you look at the countries, you can see a lot of these are where the problems are today. Slide, please. And let's we don't have time to get all the hash out the Cold War, but between 45 and 89, 49 and the Warsaw Pact and all of that. They're all the way to Eastern Germany and Eastern Central Europe, both a platform for possible invasion, but also a buffer zone for a Soviet Union, a Russia that had been traumatized in the Second World War. Slide, please. And we talk about NATO enlargement. Let me say this right up front. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I'm going to give some perspectives about NATO from a Russian perspective, which are negative. I am a fervent NATO advocate and believe that NATO was as much about bringing stability to those historically tortured lands in Central and Eastern Europe after the breakup of the Cold War, as just being there to block or to oppose Russia, which is the Russian view. Slide, please. We are going to now, and here we are today. I just want to bring it to today. I'm going to show this cartoon twice. It's kind of accurate. We're out there. You've got this face-off now. Remember, the Russians invaded Crimea, Ukraine, and illegally annexed Crimea in 2014. Friends, I was our American military defense attaché in Moscow. I saw the whole thing go down. And here we are. They came in using stealth, disinformation, never admitted it. They finally admitted Crimea, but they never ever admitted putting Russian regulars into Eastern Ukraine. They call it Donbass, which is now in the heart of the drama today. But here we are. On the left, there's Zelensky, NATO, the Western nations, and they're negotiating with Vladimir Putin and the Russians, who are doing it through coercion and military might and thumping their chests and intimidation. So something's got to give here. It's very dangerous. Slide, please. But now I digress because I want to give you my short origin story, how I ended up in the army, how I ended up in the Soviet Russian business and ended up in the Soviet Union and kept going back to Russian. I'm from Chicago. I grew up in New York City, went to high school, middle school, and high school in New York, and there's in the upper left. And I, for a number of reasons, joined the Army. I volunteer in 1980. I enlist as a private first class to go to officer candidate school. I joined for 3 years. I stayed for 34, and I still scratch my head and say, what the hell happened? But during that, so I'm at the bottom area, I'm in basic training, 1980. All of America is there. Growing up during the era of Dr. Strangelove, the Cold War, the more senior of us remember that well. And I started my career in a nuclear-capable artillery cannon battalion that in the worst case, their mission would be to go to Europe and from 8 miles away, 10 miles away, lob nuclear rounds at the opposing on-Russian Soviet Warsaw Pact. How crazy was that? But we took it seriously, and that was the world, and we never want to go back to that again. And I worry there's a lot more talk about nuclear. And then on the upper right, that's what I looked like before I went to Russia as a young Army captain, and that's my bride, Stephanie, who I met during this time, who just helped us out of this digital issue. Slide, please. This is change of the end of the Cold War stuff, glasnost, perestroika, the opening, restructuring. I get, as an American Army intelligence officer, captain, and a couple of others, a visa to go with an American college group, Brown University and University of Rochester, to this provincial city of Kalinin. They rename it Tver in 1990. And on the map, you'll see where I was. I was between Leningrad at the time and Moscow. And I'm can't believe I'm in the Soviet Union. They know who I am. And I have basically, with my fellow American students, free reign of the city. And the Russians, again, were in regard to the United States, Yeah, they're distrustful in a lot of things, but it was all about business and freedom and democracy. I mean, it was a remarkable time to be there. Tver, you see on the red on the slide is where I was. Slide, please. And this is a Soviet Union that is struggling with its infrastructure, its social services, taking care of people. And that's kind of a look at it. This is the Volga River and the Great Bridge, which is one of the early great bridges modeled after by the same guy to build the Eiffel Tower. And then there's Lenin Square and churches. Orthodox churches are coming back at the time. There's a bank that was eternally in construction. But that's kind of how it looked. Slide, and this is again the summer of 1989. Slide. And this is a people moment. I don't meet any top Soviet Russian bigwigs, maybe some city council people as us being introduced to the business and all that. We're out there among the people for this summer. We're out on the beach where we swim across the Volga. It's about 300 yards there. And we're out there the picture on the right is our college group with some Russians mixed in, and we've just found the ingredients for pizza. It took us like 8 days to find the mozzarella to make a freaking pizza. And then I meet Russian military that are kind of blown away, and they bring me into a picture. And then there I am with a couple of Russian military, got a hat on my head, and we're talking about blue jeans and discs and CDs and things. Slide. And Tver is actually beautiful. It was run down, provincial city. Alfasani Nikitin would be really interesting to read up on him. He's Russia's Christopher Columbus. He was born there, and in the 1400s gets out as far as India. And they write about, and there's a monument. And then Alexander Pushkin, you all would know him at the Redwood, but he loved Tver. And so that is a statue of everything on the river. Slide. And I come back, friends, 8 times to Tver. And I have old friends, new friends. I come in winter, I come in summer. And my book is about the evolution of this city and its people during this very, very consequential time. These are kind of winter pictures. I'm with my absolutely loved him, but he was a bit of a ne'er-do-well. Igor Zubov, a bit of a ladies' man. And we're sitting there, and there's the frozen Volga River down on the left with an artist and his dogs, and then the bottom right is Igor's gravestone. He died in 2009 of alcoholism, and you had a lot of unhealthy living, smoking, alcoholism as Russia struggled during this time of sadly a mostly failed democracy. Slide, please. And during this time, I'm able, and this shows you how open it was. I'm with another Army captain friend, totally openly. We get a visa, we fly to Moscow, and we rent a little Lada car, which you see, it's like an old Fiat 124. And the summer of 1991, 6 months before the breakup, we drive from Moscow to Tbilisi, Georgia, and end up at Sochi. It was a trip of a lifetime. And we go through the Donbass, and we go through all these areas. The farther we got from Moscow, the more we could see Russian Soviet central control breaking down. Infrastructure, getting out there, and basically gas tankers on the side of the road, and you're paying. And at that point, our dollars were king, and you're paying 20 cents for a liter of gas. I mean, it was I don't have time to get into it, but here's the point that I will make over and over again. While things were really, really getting creaky and struggling, no sense that the entire Soviet Union would fall apart. Slide, please. And I'm going to have to move faster. I get taken by Russian students in Tver to Mednoye. Some of you may have read online. Just write this down. Read Memorial. And Memorial Pamya is a group that just got shut down in Moscow. Sakharov was the great scientist and liberal in 89, was able to get this group that was opening up this nasty, horrific side of Soviet history that is part of the organic scar tissue, sadly, today of Russia. But the terrible things that happened under his rule and the repressions, and the millions that died, including tens of thousands of Polish officers that were captured in 1939, right outside of Tver. I got taken to a recently opened grave site to 4,000 plus or minus Polish officers that were executed there in the woods. So now Memorial, the bottom thing, it's an NGO, and the current regime, the Putin regime, sees them as foreign agents, and they've shut them down. And it's a real tragedy. Slide, please. Just street scenes of this wild west of Russia, of the end of the Soviet Union and beginning of the Yeltsin years. Their press is out there, all kinds of samizdat and just newspapers and all of that. Still run down. You get old and new. You have a lot of exhausted, drunk people. You have Roma. You have all of it. The place is run down. They're struggling to try to get better, but it's pretty heavy. Slide, please. And just more pictures. You have a lot of bazaars and queues and people selling. That frankly, the women, in my mind, hold it together during the early mid-90s, end of the Soviet Union, because a lot of the guys are out and they're drunk. There's a picture of a guy up there with his Lada, and he said, I will buy medals and orders and valuables and antiques, anything. And it's just street scenes. And then, the infrastructure, it's a really difficult place. There are also good things going on in that time, in internet and all of that arrived, but they're struggling. There are two major ruble devaluations. Honest people are getting creamed, and the black marketeers, of which I knew a number, thrive, and I write about this in the book. And some of them become oligarchs. Slide, please. But that leaves some of the bitterness that you have of that era, and then just people. Now, just people and out and about that I know and I meet. A lot of drinking. And there in the lower left, I meet a guy that is a blue jean dealer. You can see him holding that with me. And I mean, and if you have a pair of New Balances and jeans, you've got great trading material. And I was able to buy, a squad's worth with my clothes of Soviet uniforms that I took back. And people, wow, how cool. And drinking was a big deal. Yeah, they have their Stoli, but they all wanted absolute vodka at that time. Slide, please. And the big thing here is that 1996, the first elections under the completely the democratized Russia. Boris Yeltsin wins. It's very close. He's got challenges, and I get invited into a polling booth. And his big opponent was a guy called Zhuganov, head of the Communist Party, who's still a player in there, almost seen as almost a moderate compared to what's going on today. This was a big deal. And to be on the streets, I was on the streets, was an incredible thing for me. And I will say this, as I talked about NATO and all this, and I'm a firm NATO guy. I believe in coexistence with Russia. And I may sound like a raving Cold Warrior, but on a personal humanitarian level, I like the Russians. I had major issues with the regime, I like the Russians, and believe one reason I stay in this is sort of in this gray zone of contact that I'm in is in the hope that we eventually would bridge our way out of this awful situation we're in, that is more steeped in emotion and Cold War baggage and ideological baggage. Americans or Russians have never been in a war other than the Cold War, but never been in a major war where a lot of people were killed. Slide, please. And I gotta accelerate. I'll only say this: Boris Yeltsin, a lot of you remember him, comes to power, and he's in until 99, 2000. He gives the reins to Putin, and very few of us saw him coming. And I think I was in the mainstream where most of us thought KGB Rube, he'll be in there for 4 years, 6 years, and then somebody else will come in. Friends, he's been there for 22 years. Okay. Love him or hate him, he's the devil we know. And here we are right now. I worry a little bit now that we've got a cult of personality that's going on, a little bit like some of those in the 1930s that we saw. And foreign policy is also driven through his personal lens of the world. Slide, please. And here's the book, Swimming the Volga. I'm shameless. I'm self-published. And this gets into a lot of this through my eyes. Slide, please. Now, let's take a deep breath and bring it out to what's going on. Let me get a sip of water. Here's the set. We're really worried. I've been doing this a long time, and there's a side of me that's in denial that the Russians may actually invade Ukraine. It doesn't make sense. I understand the history. I understand the baggage. I understand the Nazis came through there. But the Russians are there. Those are Russian formations. They're arrayed. They could go at the snap of the finger now. They're in Belarus. We'll talk more about that. Is it demonstrating and posturing? You bet. But will it be will they look for a provocation that creates a justification so that they intervene and they get to say they intervened and they're not aggressors? It's really dangerous, friends. Slide, please. But let's go back. I talked about NATO. This is what Putin and the regime is saying. We want you to go back to 1997 borders, take the weapons out in any of the 1997 countries. This is from a Russian view of NATO moving to the east. By the way, all these countries wanted to be in NATO because they didn't want to be caught in between Russia and the West in all the nasty little conflicts in between. But from a Russian view, from 1 to 14, this is an advance of the West to NATO, and it's getting uncomfortably close to Moscow, where it says Russia. And guess what, friends? Ukraine and Belarus are right in the way. Next slide, please. And the Nazis came there in 1941 in a horrific war of annihilation, and somewhere between 20 and 26 million Soviets died, majority of which were Russian, but 5-7 million Ukrainians. I mean, it was a horror show. Now, historically, did the Soviets bring some of it on themselves by making deals? Yes, but the bottom line, there were a lot of innocent civilians that were it was horrific, but that's still part of the scar tissue and DNA. They also contrive it. And then you go back, think about history in bookends. Russia had another conflict of annihilation 800 years ago when the Mongols swept out of the steppe in the east and captured Rus, which was both linked to Ukraine and to Russia. And the fighters were put to the sword, families were enslaved, or they had to flee into the north. So there's a lot of scar tissue here, and that's all I need to say. Doesn't mean they're right for what they're doing, though. And out of this, though, I believe that Russia lives in the world of existential threats, real, perceived, and imagined, real, perceived, and contrived. And we're getting a lot of this contrived now. Slide. Threats from the West. I go blue in the face, there's no threat. And then the Russians will say, look, Teutonic Knights, the Poles, the Swedes, Napoleon, they'll throw that back at you. And I'm saying the West isn't that today. And so on. Slide. And here's I love this cartoon. It's kind of little bit of machismo there. There's a Russian bear. He's got the axe. And you've got the tentacles from the Nazis, the Swedes, the French are there. And here comes NATO again, and we're going to have to chop those tentacles off again. Slide, please. Putin, I'll only say uber leader, clearly in charge. It doesn't mean he doesn't have vulnerabilities. People have gone out in the street. He's not Stalin, but he is a high-level autocrat and authoritarian, but he has a balancing act. But he runs a place, I call it a pseudo-democratic kleptocracy and autocratic kleptocracy, the veneers of democracy, but really run like a mafia crime boss in a family. So yes, he gets, and so those oligarchs and moneyed interests there on the left, they're supportive and loyal. He gives them patronage and he gives them access and they make money. But he expects loyalty. Now, if they go on a war and it doesn't go well, how are these people going to react? Because a bad war for Russia is bad for business, I suggest. So there is a little bit of a governor there. They're patriotic, but these are cold-blooded realists as well. Slide, please. The other point being on that is that Putin could be in power another 14 years. So we're just going to have to see what happens. But as we know in Russian history, in Soviet history, Russia snapped twice in the last century, 1917, 18, and certainly in 89, 91. I don't have time to get into it, but Putin is absolutely neuralgic about NATO and what happened to the breakup of the Soviet Union and all the Russian expats living out there. And this is in many ways his blueprint. Slide. I go to Moscow. I still am in this gray zone, and I don't know where it'll end. Our side knows, they know. I get invitations. I attended the Moscow Security Conference, Ministry of Defense, 45 nations, and I spoke at it as an American independent delegate. And I had talked to State Department and NS, people knew I was there. And it was really fraught, but I arrived, friends, and there's and I know, but I see it visibly. There's a Russian White House, if you will, and there's the Russian flag at half staff. Why? Because it is the 80th anniversary of the invasion, the Nazi invasion, again, where all those people were killed. I was there 30 years ago on the same day and bought 2 newspapers of that 50 years, 50th anniversary, and brought them to the conference, which surprised a lot of Russians, to kind of show them I've been here for a while, okay? While I don't necessarily agree, I have a history. Slide, please. And here, I just show this slide just to see, just look at the arrows. And it's exaggerated, but barely so. This is the Nazi invasion. And there's Moscow at the tip of the arrow there. And that's how they will get people agitated. And they try to put NATO into, you go into Ukraine, and now we're just, Putin said, basically, we have nowhere left to defend. Stop. That's old thinking. But that's how they play it. Slide. I go to this ceremony with some internationals on that day, and on that anniversary day, and it's a very solemn Russian ceremony commemorating the horror of that invasion. That church, that beautiful old church behind, was sanctified in 2017. It was built in the last 10 years. But what it shows how they have tied back into Russian Orthodoxism, the Orthodox Church. all the communist symbology, most of it is gone, though they still hearken a little bit back to the Soviet Union and all that. But this, I think, is a very interesting, that's a new church. Slide, please. And the historic heroes in full bloom. I go in and there's Alexander Nevsky or Dmitry Donskoy and Kutuzov, Borodino, and Suvorov the Great. That's what's on all the billboards downtown. Slide. I go to the security conference. A lot of what we're hearing now, we're hearing already in there. And I'm pinching myself. I'm sitting in there and I speak the second day. Putin is teleconferenced in, and Shoigu, who is the Minister of Defense, Gerasimov, chief of their military, Lavrov, who you see on the press, State Department, Patrushev, their national security advisor, the FSB chief, the intelligence chief, they're all there. And hearing the narration, how we're the, how the West and we are the reason that all these problems are occurring, and the risk of war is very, very real. All of that is there. Slide, please. And echoing it are these mix of speakers from other countries. People's Republic of China, Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Venezuela, Vietnam, Myanmar, Laos, Nicaragua, all our friends. And you get that narrative there as well. There were some NATO countries there. The OSCE chief spoke, as well as the United Nations online. All right. Again, there were 45. I was a senior American delegate. Thank God there was an American officer from the embassy, but it's fraught, but the narrative was there. Slide. Look at this. We're just looking at the picture, just because we're going to talk about Ukraine. Just look at it on the map. You've all seen the map 100,000 times, but look how it sits between the what we call NATO's West. Ukraine's desperate to get into NATO. Above it is Belarus, where all these crazy things have happened. And there's talk about Russian troops going into Belarus as we speak, risking threatening Ukraine from the north. And then, of course, Black Sea. Slide. I'm accelerating. It really starts to get bad. There's 1999 as Kosovo, which was righteous. NATO basically stepped around United Nations because the Russians and the Chinese have a block in the Security Council with their veto, and they went in to save the genocide in Kosovo. But the Russians, even my friends in Tver at the time, were irate about it. And then 1999 was also enlargement. But the next there's Iraq in 2003. The Russians are totally against. And then Georgia, when the Russians felt that the Georgians were pressing too hard and basically attacked and cut off parts of Georgia, and that's really when they really start pushing outside their borders. It's a problem still today. They don't do well, and they have to go to some major military reform. Slide, please. But I like this cartoon as we're coming to, because I talked about NATO and all these countries that joined NATO. And now there's Ukraine. And somewhere in there, in that skewered, in my mind, blinkered Russian threat perception, that's visceral. When we talk about, I think, the Russians and their foreign policy, they put these cold-blooded analytical look, but it's visceral and it's emotive. And for the reasons I try to describe, doesn't mean they're right. And they see Ukraine, and they're wrong. They see it as actually part of Russia. But they also see if Ukraine gets deeper into the West, especially if the democratic regime, that this is an existential threat to autocrats, including those in Moscow. Slide. And here we are. I'm in Moscow, where we're seeing the reports of people in Crimea, and then the the non-attributed support process. This is the in eastern Ukraine where the Russians say there are no troops. We believe there are. That's that horrible air crash occurred. They shoot down. Air Malaysia and Dutch died on it. But that's the line. 13 to 14,000 died there. And this is the hot spot. Slide, please. It's been 7 years. And the Russians are reading about the buildups. I'll just say this. Russians are not hiding what they're doing. I think there's a coercive side to get the West to back down, get their demands, and they're demanding. And I think one of their miscalculations, friend, is the West hasn't backed down. And in fact, I think it hardened. And it's now putting the Russians into a bit of a bind, I think, where, all right, they're not listening to us. What do we do? Do we negotiate our way out of this? But does that show weakness to our own, to internationally and to our own population that most don't want to go to war? I'm not convinced most of them really fully understand the issues. They're listening to what they're fed. But Russia's actually quite internet connected, less so than, much more so than China. But that's what it is. So there they are, pictures of Russians all along there in flagranto. And I think there's a lot of chest thumping. But the question is this: have they put themselves in a bind now? Do they go? Or do they back off? And we are in that dangerous space now. Slide. And you've heard about Belarus and Kaliningrad. There's a whole bunch of bad stuff that could happen in the north, up towards the Baltics, where you've got a lot of NATO there. It's hard to contain a war, friends. And the thought that you get an invasion of Ukraine, that somehow that wouldn't spill over to an area where people are really nervous and there are a lot of weapons, I'm not sure. So hopefully cooler heads are ultimately going to prevail here. Slide. And Belarus, you've all been reading about it. The Belarus popular movement last year, again, look at it on the map. It sits right between Poland and heartland Russia. Had the migrants and the Belarusians, creating problems with Poland and Lithuania. Lukashenko, the president, was very much his own autocratic guy, but needed Russian help with the major demonstrations of last year. Now the Russians, I think, are manipulating them, and there's talk about substantial Russian forces going into Belarus to threaten Ukraine. Slide. And just look at the picture. Look in that north where it says Belarus and that dotted arrow. That's all I want to get into it. All the other areas are potential invasion areas from Russia. That dotted area is from Belarus, where the Russians now may be contemplating. And that's Kiev right there, the capital of Ukraine. A lot of us thought Russians wouldn't do something so grandiose. I think a lot of us still remain dubious because it would be a huge commitment for the Russians. You take all that ground, and now guess what you've got to do, friends? You've got to hold it. Now you have to worry about partisans, insurgents, stifling sanctions, international censure, and Russian population. And you saw it in Afghanistan 30 years ago that might not totally like the idea of something where a lot of body bags are coming back. Stay tuned. We don't have a lot of time. Slide. And there is the Black Sea, Crimea. Crimea, the Russians will go to war over Crimea, full stop. Though they illegally annexed it, there's a long history with Crimea with the old Russia, but it is part of Ukraine, and they needed to work through it legally and not. So they invaded it, but it is so sensitive, the Black Sea right now. 3 NATO nations border it. Slide, please. And along that periphery, that slide I showed you, you've got some of the other countries that are fomenting and bubbling. And while Russia is huge, friends, it isn't that big. 145 million population. Military active duty is just under 1 million, though they can mobilize. So they got a major balancing thing to deal with. And so when you have problems on their periphery, where they have garrisons and peacekeepers, this pulls away from the other thing. Slide. Problems, they're worried about Afghanistan. You read about the recent problems in Kazakhstan. Slide, please. Where there are, of the 18 million, about 3.5 million Russians, plus the Baikonur Cosmodrome. I don't think the Russians are going to try to take Kazan. It's too big and too much to hold. Plus, they already have their influencers in there. Slide, please. China, Russia. It's a big deal. You can't talk about these macro things without addressing China. There is and I'll only highlight that the Chinese border with Russia is as long as our border with Canada, to give you scale. And it hasn't always been a good border. And that chunk of the Far East that borders China today and Russia was taken in a very unpopular couple of agreements 150 years ago. So there's baggage. It's also resource rich, of which that's the one thing the Chinese need more than anything else. And oddly enough, if you will, one of the things Americans and Russians have in common is we're relatively resource dependent. Stay tuned. Slide, please. But here's the point. The Chinese and the Russians, I think right now, strategically are covering each other's back. They've made nice peace. They've got some trade going. China can focus in the Pacific. Russia can focus on the West and the South. That doesn't mean they're going to go to war for each other, but they would get uncomfortable, I believe, if either one of them were going to get into a war and start to lose, because then the other one is isolated. So we got to watch and worry about it. They're partners. They're real strategic partner. That doesn't mean they're military allies. Last point. Both of them conceivably, and they meet 4 or 5 times a year up until COVID. They're going to meet again in Beijing for the Olympics. They could be together as cooperative for up to 14 more years. So more to follow. Slide. And Belt and Road Initiative. They're cooperating on it. I can't believe the Russians are comfortable with the Chinese-led Belt and Road that goes through the lands of their former Soviet Union. Slide, please. And in the north, the Polar Silk Route, cutting right up through that area. And while the Russians make good money, they've kind of fallen behind where Exxon was. You can't be, if you're a Russian strategist and you're Moscow-centric and 80% of your population, which is 1/9 that of China, you can't be totally comfortable with the economic and tendrils that are running to the north and south of you. Slide, please. And there is growing Chinese and Russian military interaction, which we need to watch very, very closely. They're not military allies, but they're doing a lot together. Slide. Internal challenges. Russia's not a freebie. Putin has to look over his shoulder. You remember Alexei Navalny, still in jail, you have pensioners. They're not afraid to demonstrate. While it is authoritarian, it's not Stalinist. You have an Islamic terror threat, they'll manage. And you have youth, while mostly pro-Putin, don't mess with their internet, like when they tried to shut down Telegram. Slide, please. If you want to read something interesting, read the Google Moscow Times Generation P and look up the article. This is a few years ago where they're talking about, here's the data point, the Russian youth. And most of them are pretty patriotic, but they're all millennials and Gen Zs. And if you are 35 and under, Putin is all you know. He's all they know. And so the profile's about 20 Russians in there at that time about their views. Slide, please. Fascinating. Russian economy, they've worked their way through, but it's very challenged. The ruble is still half of what it was when I was there. So life out in the countryside, though better actually than the 1990s I saw, is still struggling. Certainly since the invasion of Ukraine and the sanctions. Slide. And sanctions. Look, people say, oh, sanction. Look, it's one of the full tools that we have. Nobody wants to go to war with the Russian Federation unless they go into blank, military aggression regarding us and our allies. But and they're exhausted by it, but they've worked around. But there are other sanctions out there that people are talking about that really would throw a major brick. Slide. They're obsessed about color revolution, regime change. Why they obsess about NATO and the Western United States is I think they're worried about our free market, our sense of democracy, free speech. And though we're challenged, they see us in Syria and Iraq and North Africa as trying to bring down regimes in their own systems. And I think that Putin and that regime feels very uncomfortable with these type of things. Slide. I love this cartoon. Slide, please. And there's Putin's ace. So how do you even the odds? You go to asymmetrical hybrid warfare, and through subversion, disinformation, religion, sport, war, terror, cyber, you try to even the odds without going to war. Slide, please. And, we've talked cyber, and we're seeing it right now. And everything from, going in and going after nodes and systems and messaging, to including in our own country. Slide. And this is how they even the odds and weaken us, because they see us as 10 feet tall when we are all fully arrayed. You heard about Nord Stream oil. They have oil as a lever. Natural gas, and Nord Stream is a way to get through a more complicated Ukraine and Central Europe. We don't like it, and that's where we are here. Slide. And I like this slide. It says a lot. There's NATO, and I'm a big NATO advocate. We're doing all we can to reinforce and everything. And there are the Russians. All these other levers are trying to undermine our strength. Slide. And just a slide on their military. They had 3 major operations, different operations that tested their entire, I won't say conventional, non-nuclear capable, whether little green men in Crimea, unattributed forces in the eastern Ukraine where they are today, and in Syria, where they're out there in complete white, blue, and red flags and everything else. A lot of these people still get killed and come back in body bags. That doesn't make that popular in the Russian homeland. Slide. We're almost done. Slide, please. Here's the key thing for the Russian chief. A great number of Russian officers have gained combat experience in these operations. Slide, please. And the Russian nuclear thing, they have that. That's the great equalizer. And they're working on modernization. And thank God we got New START signed with them on strategic nukes, but it's dangerous out there. Slide. And there are a whole world of exotic new weapons that are some are actually being, hypersonic, and you're reading about nuclear torpedoes. Some are on the drawing book, but the Russians are thumping, and it is scary. Right back to Dr. Strangelove. Slide, please. I'm in Moscow a few years ago, and you're just down there by the zoo, and they're practicing for the Victory in Europe Day, and there comes trundling down a Russian ICBM. That matters to them. Slide. And here's the point I want to make, that if things really, really get hard and Russians are backed up against a wall, they'll flip us the nuclear bird. And probably in a way to try to divide us and our NATO allies, threaten our allies. It's very scary, but that's also part of that. Slide, please. And there it is. We're playing chess. We're playing diplomacy, and we're moving our piece. And the Russians are being very blatant and very aggressive in their demands, backing it up with force. I'm going to take 2 more minutes and end this. Slide, please. Because I want to go back to the beginning, Tver. I'd come back to Tver. I'd probably been to Tver 18 times since I first studied there in 89. And this is my most recent trip in 2019. I mean, I come in on a modern train, digitized tickets. So a lot has happened in Russia I mean, they're quite connected. And I'm still, every time I go back, can't believe I'm there. Slide. And the pictures I showed you earlier, there's Lenin, and you've got, in 2017, there's the 100th anniversary of the October, and then the black and white picture of what it looked like 30 years ago. Slide. And there it is where it looked 30 years ago, and they're rebuilding the central cathedral, and there what it looks like today. Slide. And there's the bank. They finally built the bank, all right, that was empty for like 16 years. Slide. And here's just a street scene, still the dichotomy of Russia. There's a young monk in this Orthodox Christian country mostly now with Karl Marx in the background. There's a war memorial there. The youth are still inculcated in the military, and I'm standing there in front of my own old Russian Soviet university where the faculty still remember me and treat me very well. Slide, please. And there is a night scene. Tver is a river city. I'm there 30 years after I swam the Volga. Those are mosquitoes on that picture. And then to my last picture, slide please. I'm swimming the Volga in 2019. I go back, and I don't swim all the way across the river, but I'm there with my USO hat on. And I've now get to say I've swum in the Volga twice. The picture on the right is I'm in Stalingrad in 2013. And so there's the thread. This is why I call the book, slide please, Swimming the Volga. Over to you. Hopefully some of you would like to ask some questions. A lot of material. Hopefully I've tried to, bring this, help try to understand what's going on today. I'm all yours.
Well, thank you so much. That was really informative. First of all, I want to invite everyone to go out and buy the book. It's a fascinating personal story, but that has so much resonance with what we're talking about tonight and facing currently. There is one question which I myself had, but it is from Lizette Prince, and I think it's an important one, of course. Just as we couldn't tolerate Russian missiles in Cuba, it's logical that Russia doesn't want NATO's eastern creep, don't you think? We know those are countries that are free to do what they want to do, but still, I mean, that question holds. So, I
don't advocate.
What's the answer?
I don't advocate nuclear weapons in the 1997, 1990 nations east. I just don't. And we already have so much destructive capability that in the end, I'm increasingly numb because I'm of the mind that the first 3 to 5 missiles that we fire, whether they're tactical, intermediate, or strategic, it's the end of the world as we know it. No, I don't think that we should have nuclear capable missiles in that, but the Russians are sitting right there on their ground, on their border with nuclear capable missiles as well, intermediate range. And this is, I think, one of the areas where we're going to where there may be some play on the medium nuclear weapons. The strategic thing is even crazier. And then, of course, we're hearing about I believe it's mostly bellicose posturing about putting more stuff into Venezuela and Cuba, or which I think is more petulance than anything else.
Okay, here's a second question. Did Putin take it as a sign that we were quiet when they took the Crimea?
It's actually a really good question. Now I'm going back to my time in the Moscow embassy. We obviously didn't like it. It was ugly. They pulled it off. They pulled off a stealth operation and sowed enough doubt and disinformation that it basically was over before we could really remonstrate. And then right on top of that, they started to play a similar playbook in eastern Ukraine and all the way to, and it didn't work, which is where we are in the static situation today. The question is, what do we do? Ukraine isn't a go to war Article 5 ally. But I do believe the Russians were surprised by the extent, once we got ourselves organized, how we turn around and buttress our position in Europe. I'll tell you the moment that I said Hail Mary in Moscow. Crimea was gone. They infiltrated in late February after the Sochi Olympics, and by March they'd taken it and annexed it almost bloodlessly without a shot. Then they tried it, as I said, they started to do stuff in eastern Ukraine, and we really were worried, friends. I mean, we're in a new paradigm that they were going to get muscular and go after the Baltic states. That at that time, almost no NATO troops in there. Were very vulnerable. And then in April, out of Vicenza, Italy, 3 airborne companies of the airborne brigade in Vicenza deployed, one into Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And we're saying in Moscow, Hail Mary, because now we've put US, NATO, because these are NATO forces, skin into the game. And the Russians do respect NATO. And they may see aspects of it as a paper tiger, but when we are pulled together and allied, we are 10 feet tall. And that, I think, is one of the areas where the Russians may have miscalculated today in trying to push us, if you will, and push us and march around. And now they have to decide if they want to really go for it.
Joe Cooper has a question. Is there wiggle room to reduce/stop NATO movement east?
I'm going to say this. I'm of the personal belief that as long as, Joel, is that great to see you guys out there? Honored. It is always, we have to I believe NATO has to keep the philosophical and documented right for a nation to have aspirations, to aspire to a NATO open door. Saying that doesn't mean NATO at 30. That means Portugal has a vote, Italy has a vote, not just us, for new membership. And I don't think it'll happen, because what is the most important thing about NATO? It's Article 5. And it brought the EU is what got the Russians going in 2014, economic. And I don't think that, and that's why we're doing all these things to support Ukraine now, short the military intervention, because in part they're not part of NATO. So it's hard. But you bring Ukraine in, or Georgia, and we love them. We love Georgia. Now you got to defend them. And you are not credible if they're part of a signatory of a defense pact and the Russians go in, or somebody else, and we don't come to save the day. So as a policy, we have to keep NATO's open door, and then you go offline the Russians and it's public. No, it's not happening. It's not happening anytime soon. Let's work the margins on this. You can't allow another nation to mandate the foreign policy of another nation, which is what Russia is doing, especially Ukraine, but on those nations of its periphery.
You know, I myself, just looking at the Ukrainian map, there's that central river that runs through Kiev in north and south. I mean, could it happen that it would be just partition? That because I know the eastern part of Ukraine is, many ethnic Russians, and they might be satisfied with half of Ukraine. I have no idea. I mean, I'm just
It's
that.
possible from a military side. Partition, I think, is if there's a partition discussion anywhere, it would be where the Russian separatists with Russians blended in are in eastern Ukraine. There's a possibility they would try to take the rest of that and then try to partition or make it autonomous. Invading all of eastern Ukraine, past it up to the Dnieper River, that includes Kyiv and is a huge fight, even for several hundreds of thousands of troops. And what I neglected to mention, the Russians grab it. Now they're in a kettle, a stew pot of their own making. They are not that big. They are now you're now out of the Russian zones. So you've got partisans. Oh, by the way, 1/3 of your ground forces are draftees. They're patriotic. That doesn't mean they want to be out there being shot at by Ukrainians after an invasion that's gotten really, really difficult. So you've got that bubbling, as I talked about before. And you got the sanctions, and you got the oligarchs that now they're trapped. And oh, by the way, now there is no way the Russians can claim that they are justifiably, they are a pariah, aggressor nation of the type that Europe hasn't seen since the 1930s. But yes, that's the Dnieper River, and that is a line. That was also a big defensive bulwark for the Germans when they were retreating in 1944.
Elizabeth Prince tells us that she swam the Dnieper River in 1964. So
Lizette is a force.
You and the Volga, her and the.
That's right. Liz, let's go swimming. I'm all ready.
Rivers of Russia. That's your next book.
Well, the rivers. Here's
so.
One last point on rivers of Russia. People think of Russia as forest and steppe, but Russia is a riverine nation. And I've tried to get out on the rivers for the very reasons that you said. The Vikings came down the river long ago.
Okay. Well, we've exhausted all the questions. Fascinating talk. We really logically would want you to come back very soon to give us an update on what's hopefully not coming. So
I just want to bring good news.
Well,
there's a side of Russia I'm fascinated. There's a side of me that really likes the Russians, as I've explained. But it is also the gift that keeps on giving when you get into my security geostrategic business.
Well, I'm going to quickly look at my outro text. I want to thank General Zwack, certainly, for his very interesting talk. I can't think of anything more timely at the moment. We'll be looking, of course, at CNN and other news outlets over the next few days to see what exactly is going to happen. Hopefully nothing bad. Next week, please join us for some local history. This will also be a very good talk with Jeer Wells on the forefathers of the Redwood, George Berkeley, to discuss why he mattered to Newport and why he matters today. And of course, you'll recall that Bishop Berkeley came to Newport in 1729, hoping to found the college in Bermuda, waiting for the check from England. Check never came, but the Philosophical Society was, of course, the nucleus that brought us the society that founded the Redwood Library. But anyway, so that will be a great talk. I want to thank General Zwack again and all of you this evening, and we'll keep you posted on the situation. Thank you all so much. Thank you.